Welcome to Christian Nutrition, the show where we reviewed every single episode of VeggieTales chronologically. And by we, I mean just me. Today's the big one, you guys. Today's the episode where we rank all VeggieTales episodes. That includes the 46 regular episodes, the 2 movies, the 1 bonus episode, Wonderful World of Autotainment, and a certain series that you can stream online that I'm going to try not to say the name of, but I think it will probably be unavoidable. Oh, and some of you may be wondering if the animated Larry Boy series will be ranked. Just stay tuned. So fair warning, all episodes were ranked by my wife and I. Clearly, I've spent way too much time with these episodes, so I have a differing opinion than probably most people. However, she's your average viewer, so she's a good person to balance out what I think of the episodes. Also, I will avoid spoilers. So for some reason you haven't seen some of these episodes, I'm not going to get into the details of the plot, really. I'm just going to tell you generics about them. So not enough to ruin any of the episodes for sure. Also, yes, the silly songs are factored here because they were included in the episodes. However, they're not going to be mentioned really too much since we already had a whole video for them already. Okay, let's do this. Let's rank all the episodes from worst to best. Starting off is the tier of episodes that I would call unwatchable, burn them in a fire pit, never, why would you consume any of these episodes? Number 50, The Wonderful World of Autotainment. While some might like this episode, it ranks as the worst for a simple reason. It's not a real VeggieTales episode. This isn't even really an episode, more like a rejected pile of VeggieTales waste. Segments that did not make it into any VeggieTales episode, and some other weird shorts that make no sense at all. Like, no sense as to why they're included here in a VeggieTales episode, except that they're animated. That's about it. This Wonderful World of Autotainment is a disgusting mess, and it's truly not worth your time. Number 49, VeggieTales on Netflix, or the show that shall not be named. Whether they are in the house, in the city, in Nazi Germany, it doesn't really matter. This series replaces everything we love about VeggieTales, mainly their stories, and replaces it with the everyday life of vegetables living in a house without humans. While the show still maintains its Christian values, it's now aimed at younger kids with nothing in it at all for anyone who's really above like 7, 8, or 9 years old. A real shame, since VeggieTales was always made for kids, sure, but it did appeal to adults as well. It had something for everybody. Now, VeggieTales on Netflix isn't bad, it just pales in comparison to VeggieTales that we know. Number 48, The Little House That Stood. The Little House That Stood is a retelling of the 3 Little Pigs and the wolf, but the wolf's replaced by a flood. Basically a modern day worship song. While this part of the episode is fine, I mean, it's just okay. It's just okay. Meanwhile, the second half of this episode massively overshadows the entire show by pushing a political agenda mass within a VeggieTales episode. Whether intentional or not, it does not teach a good lesson. It makes this episode extremely hard to recommend to anyone. Add on that it really wasn't all that entertaining, and all you have here is just a bad episode. Number 47, Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark on paper seems like a great idea. Unfortunately, in execution, it was not done well at all. The story of Noah as told by the VeggieTales is classic VeggieTales, and add on that we see it all from the perspective of one of Noah's sons sounds like it should be interesting. It should be interesting. But Noah's son is selfish and uninteresting, which compounded by the fact the episode feels very little like VeggieTales and more like its successor show, which shall not be named. Oh, and for some reason it used the successor show's animation style. Overall, just a complete disappointment in execution. Number 46, Beauty and the Beat. Beauty and the Beat sounds like it should be VeggieTales' take on the classic story in The Beauty and the Beast, which it is, minus the love portion, so it's nothing like the original story, in fact. It focuses way too much on Kelly Pickler singing the vast majority of this soundtrack by herself. It's like they were just trying to make a soundtrack and they just made an episode while they were doing that, while also portraying herself as the perfect Mary Sue character. All in all, it's just a dull drag that's hard to sit through, and this was the final VeggieTales episodes with the original animation, and it really showed us all how low VeggieTales had sunk over the years. Number 45, 'Twas the Night Before Easter. Don't let the name fool you, this episode is not 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, but adjusted for Easter. In fact, it's merely a ripoff of an earlier episode VeggieTales had done prior with the Star of Christmas. Pretty much. There are some shining moments in the darkness from Larry and Mr. Lunt, but they are far and few between. Once again, it's an episode you can never watch and feel like you've never missed anything. All right, so now we're in the next tier of episodes. These are what I consider simply lackluster. They're average, you know, they're not, there's nothing really that special about them. And these are the ones I'd recommend for those who are hardcore viewers, though the hardcore viewers of VeggieTales have already probably seen them. But if you fall in love with VeggieTales and you haven't watched these yet, watch them. I mean, they're worth a one-time watch. That's really what this tier is. It's the one-time watch tier. Number 44, The Penniless Princess. Mary Sue! Yes! VeggieTales had an issue in later episodes of having a girl protagonist with no flaws whatsoever. Oh man, well, The Penniless Princess is pretty much the prime example of this, along with Beauty and the Beat. While the countertop scenes are fun and Larry's role in the actual story genuinely surprised me, the overall episode is just so-so and does nothing truly fun or genuinely good, aside from the horse joke. That was a good running gag. Number 43, It's a Meaningful Life. A story based on It's a Wonderful Life? Maybe in the loosest sense. It's a Meaningful Life goes the route of showing Larry what his life would have been like had he caught the football to win the game and not Mr. Lunt. Now, how that one catch made Mr. Lunt a great player, a legendary player when he was clearly incompetent before, and made Larry go from what should have been the legendary player to complete trash is beyond comprehension. But beside that, the episode is far too focused on the bland story and only has some small moments of hilarity that stems mostly from Mr. Lunt's character, but not an episode that will excite you to watch it over and over again by any means. Number 42, Sweet Pea Beauty. The ugliest episode from VeggieTales post 1995, and this came out in 2010. The subpar animation along with the glitches and a clearly unfinished episode makes us wonder how this ever got out the door and onto shelves. But ignoring all of that, the music is clearly a cheap ripoff of Disney, a very cheap ripoff. The story is not based on Sleeping Beauty like the name implies, but Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Which means that the title is also misleading. Wow, VeggieTales they're doing clickbait. The only thing keeping this episode afloat from being rock bottom is once again Mr. Lunt, the French peas, and the complete ridiculousness of a mirror trying to take over the entire kingdom. Oh brother, this episode really requires you to turn your brain off, but once you do, it's a terribly funny mess. Number 41, Esther, the Girl That Became Queen. The year was 2000 and VeggieTales finally showed that there were cracks in the seemingly impenetrable armor. Yeah, that started with this episode. The title gives away the plot, the main characters are uninteresting, the songs are lame and the story is dull, and there's no silly song and no countertop scenes. What's even the point? This episode was very much representative of all the poor choices VeggieTales would begin to make in the years to come. The only thing saving this episode is that it does stick closely to the actual Bible story. But simply reading in the Bible is actually infinitely more entertaining to see a bunch of vegetables trying to do it justice, but they don't, and it takes them like 45 minutes. You could read the Bible story much faster, and it's way better. Number 40, An Easter Carol. Why couldn't VeggieTales make good, entertaining Easter episodes? Probably because they try to rip off classic Christmas stories and repackage them as Easter stories. This one is beat for beat a Christmas story, except Rebecca St. James plays an obnoxious fairy who ends up being the sole reason to watch this episode. Ah, yes, of course, Rebecca St. James, because nobody knows what I'm talking about. Once again, there's no silly song contained in the doll retelling of a Christmas classic, and literally, what's the point? Number 39, God Wants Me to Forgive Them? Ah, the second episode VeggieTales ever put on, and it shows. They mistakenly did not put a silly song in this episode when fans had clearly wanted one. In fact, they purposely made that a thing from here on out because of the fan backlash from this episode. And frankly, there was far too much focus on Junior in this episode. The first half of this episode is just okay, which the Forgive-O-Matic is an interesting concept that gets jabbed at later on in another episode. This episode is actually saved because it never takes itself too serious. Thank goodness. And it does have an interesting second half that is based on Gilligan's Island. I mean, trees come to life and talk in this episode, and this is the only time that ever happens, so that pretty much shocked us all when we first saw it. I think there's a reason they never did it again. Number 38, A Snoodle's Tale. A Snoodle's Tale, my old nemesis. Upon rewatching this episode, it improved. Now, is it good? Not in my opinion. But this is where my wife comes in and saves it from being ranked dead last. The first half of the episode is pretty good. The Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story, which is seemingly pointless, is still humorous. The second half focuses on a Snoodle's journey to literally talking face to face with God is just as dumb, contrived, and boring as it could be, while the message is strong. I mean, that's probably the only thing that it has going for it. The actual story is hot trash. This is an episode I recommend you turn off after just the silly song. Number 37, Abe and the Amazing Promise. This episode for me is a mixed bag. While the actual story of Abraham told as a documentary as hosted by Junior is actually interesting, it really is the smaller, shorter story on the DVD despite being the name on the DVD. You see, the last 2/3 of this episode, the second half we'll call it, is a pretty boring story about not rushing through things and doing your job right, which is a good lesson, but the story itself is a complete snooze fest despite starring Larry and Mr. Lunt. This is once again an episode you can turn off as soon as the silly song is done and you haven't missed anything. Number 36, The Star of Christmas. While some may argue that Esther was the first time VeggieTales aimed to tell a serious story, I would say no, The Star of Christmas is the first time and pretty much last time VeggieTales told a serious story and did it pretty well. Once again though, it is missing countertop scenes, silly songs. This is all in service to the more serious story that VeggieTales was presenting here. And I mean, it mostly works, but it would leave VeggieTales to making more like it, and none of them could hold a candle to The Star of Christmas. Number 35, Princess and the Pop Star. Hey kids, remember Hannah Montana? Remember when she was popular? Well, VeggieTales did, and that is why many years after Hannah Montana was a thing, they did the classic Prince and the Pauper story, but based on a dead Disney Channel show. Yay! This episode isn't bad, but the story itself, along with the silly song, makes it feel very dated. At least the main character isn't a Mary Sue like most other female protagonists, so I can give it that. Number 34, Pistachio, the Little Boy That Wouldn't. Anyone who has ever seen my review of this episode knows how much I despise it, and they're probably surprised it's this far up on the list. It takes Pinocchio and rips off that without adding much to it. It also rips music off from Disney, and overall is a pretty dull story about Junior being a dumb, lying kid, which we all knew from like the very first episode of VeggieTales. However, if the direct comparisons to Disney do not matter to you, and you have not seen Pinocchio, then this episode probably seems really good. Christian version of Pinocchio. Yeah, that's really what it is. This is an episode that I imagine has split opinions among the VeggieTales fan base, and for good reason. Alright, we're into the next tier of episodes, and these are what I consider good. Just flat out good. I mean, they do have some flaws, they're not perfect by any means, they're good episodes. These are ones I would actually watch again if I was asked. And I want to be very clear, there is a considerable gap between Pistachio and this next episode. So it's not like they're close, in fact, the gap's pretty large, so don't think that this next episode's even close to Pistachio, because it's not. Number 33, Sherlock Holmes and the Golden Ruler. This take on Sherlock Holmes with Larry as Sherlock and Bob as Mr. Watson has its moments of hilarity and a story that actually works. While the actual resolution to the crime is silly, this is VeggieTales. It's expected and it works here. What is lacking here is the other story about an asparagus running a restaurant and more of the classic VeggieTales humor we have come to expect. And when the humor is present, it just feels like it's spread a bit thin. There's just not enough here to hold up a whole episode and to hold back what otherwise is a solid episode, and is what makes Sherlock Holmes from placing much higher on this list. Number 32, Larry Boy and the Fib from Outer Space. He is that hero! The Fib from Outer Space was the hotly anticipated debut of Larry Boy. Unfortunately, this episode is marred by making Larry Boy to be completely incompetent and having Junior be the cause of the problem and the solution. Larry Boy is just window dressing in an episode named after him. A bit disappointing, even though the episode is still pretty good. We just expected a lot more. The Larry Boy theme song is super catchy and it will be stuck in your head for days, so forewarning. Number 31, Larry Boy and the Rumor Weed. The sequel to The Fib from Outer Space, and sure enough, we actually see Larry Boy stop crime in the beginning of the film, and that's it. He actually puts a better foot forward here to stopping the rumor weed than he did with the Fib, but once again he fails epically and Junior has to save the day. Notice a trend yet? Yeah, this episode gets a bump over Fib for showing us that Larry can actually stop crime and for having that catchy rumor weed song. And that's a hard one to get out of your head. Number 30, Sumo of the Opera. Have you ever watched a Rocky film and thought to yourself, when will VeggieTales parody this already? Well, Sumo of the Opera answers that question, as Larry is a terrible sumo wrestler who trains like Rocky to get better. It is an above average story that doesn't have anything too special going for it, which can really be said about the other two segments here. One is a silent Three Stooges parody, and another is a flannel graph story about St. Patrick that I would personally consider the highlight of this episode. Everything here is solid, including the silly song. This is why I would consider a good baseline VeggieTales episode to compare all episodes to. This is pretty much average, middle of the road episode. So if something's worse than this, it's below average. Anything's better than this, it's above average. Number 29, Celery Night Fever. Celery Night Fever is a mixed bag of an episode. It has a solid story, despite it being a copy of the 2011 Muppets movie, legitimately funny humor, a good silly song, and a catchy opening song. Even the villain is hilariously over the top, and I love when they do that. It also introduces the Groovy Brothers, which is definitely not the Doobie Brothers, which later get referenced in Beauty and the Beat. All of this sounds like it should be placed higher, right? Well, honestly, the music single-handedly forces this down the list. Sure, the silly song is good, but all the other music feels wildly out of place in a VeggieTales episode. Even though I like the villain song for its over-the-top terribleness, it's still way out of place. Now, if that doesn't bother you, then great. This episode is much higher on this list for you. But the music is so out of place in an otherwise very good episode of VeggieTales that it falls down here. But I can totally understand why someone would want this much higher on the list. Number 28, Lord of the Beans. While not the first or last time VeggieTales would parody something in pop culture, it is pretty much the most well-known and most relevant since it is based on Lord of the Rings, which was penned by a Christian author, and Lord of the Beans is a solid VeggieTales take on a 10-hour story condensed into about 40 minutes. If you're a big fan of Lord of the Rings, then you undoubtedly love this episode, while the rest of us will say, meh. The silly song is just okay, and a lot of the entertainment value here stems on your knowledge of Lord of the Rings. A solid episode by itself, but is bolstered by the story it is parodying. Number 27, Mac, Larry, and the Stinky Cheese Battle. Despite being released near the end of VeggieTales, this episode is the only one I can point to that released in the 2010s that feels through and through like a classic VeggieTales episode. While it isn't based on a Bible story, it is silly, effectively teaches a valuable life lesson, and has a consistent tone throughout. The story is original, the silly song is funny, and the countertop scenes really set the stage. We also get Bob beating the daylights out of some bagpipes. It's a brilliant moment. The only reason this episode isn't higher on this list is because the middle story kind of drags. This episode would have benefited greatly from being about 10 minutes shorter, as the beginning and end are really fun, just the middle. Just cut some of that middle part. Overall, a great episode though. Number 26, The Toy That Saved Christmas. The highs are high and the lows are low. The Toy Saved Christmas has amazing moments and some super dull moments. Anytime we see our VeggieTales friends, this episode rocks. Whenever Buzzsaw Louie's on screen, This episode is bolstered by an amazing silly song and a catching opening tune that I still sing to this day. Number 25, Robin Good and His Not So Merry Men. Robin Good sits here in the middle at 25, which makes sense. This is an episode that once again is solid throughout and has no glaring holes. It also doesn't have anything that truly makes it amazing, which is a shame since there seem to be a lot of missed opportunities here when it comes to Robin Hood jokes. Otherwise, it's a silly good time. Even the silly song is great and brought us the final appearance of the Boys in Sync, otherwise known as the BITs. Why isn't this episode higher? Junior, of course. His little opening story at the beginning of the show is lame and not very entertaining. If you skip that, then you will have yourself a good time, and this episode will probably be higher on the list. Number 24, Moe and the Big Exit. Did you want a sequel to The Battle of Little Joe? Well, if your answer was yes, then VeggieTales delivers that here with Moe and the Big Exit, which is a retelling of Moses freeing Egypt, but as a Western. Yes, they really did that. This is a good episode that maybe should have been about 10 minutes shorter since it does feel like it's dragging sometimes. Otherwise, it is highly recommended and you do get to see Larry harass Mr. Nezzer, which is truly a joy. Number 23, Mary Larry and the True Light of Christmas. Somehow a mixed bag of an episode ended up at 23. How, you may ask? Well, it has an amazing first 15 minutes and an awesome silly song. Those two things alone are really that good. Everything else is just fine. Just fine indeed. Basically, a little Mary Sue shows up and derails what was otherwise a good premise. Oh well. Despite falling this high on the list, there are two better Christmas episodes to watch. Number 22, The Little Drummer Boy. You would think an episode starring Junior would be the bane of my existence, but not here. We get to see an angsty Junior ruin things for others, which is truly fun. We also see his life change when he reconnects with his parents and plays the classic title song. It is a touching moment that seals this episode as a great VeggieTales Christmas episode, a must watch alongside another that will be mentioned later. Also, VeggieTales takes the 8 Polish Foods of Christmas song from their classic Christmas album and makes it into a legitimate silly song. It took them long enough. Number 21, The Pirates Who Don't Do Anything, the movie. Wow, a Pirates movie by VeggieTales. What a great idea. You would, when you saw the silly song the first time, you probably thought, no, those guys would be great in their own episode. Little did you know they would get an entire movie. And unfortunately, this idea was executed about 8 years too late and did not have the story to uphold an entire film. While good, it feels like it overstays its welcome and actually shows us that the pirates are a lot more fun as side characters we saw in Jonah. Had this been a regular 45-minute episode though, I think it would have ranked much higher, but hey, it's still silly, fun, and even has Reliant K's rendition of their theme song, which is great. Not a bad way to spend an hour and a half. Number 20, Gideon Tuba Warrior. If you have read the classic story of Gideon in the Bible, then you will really enjoy this episode. This is an episode where Larry purposely whittles his army down to have less people in it, and all they care about is keeping their free flashlights. Freedom? Who needs that garbage? Just as long as I can see in the dark with my flashlight in a time where there are no batteries. How does that even work? Pa Grape as an angel from God and Larry as Gideon actually works as a good combo of characters. They really bounce off each other really well. Add on seeing Gideon's army demolish the others by, well, watch the episode and you'll find out. Number 19, Veggies in Space, The Final Frontier. Do you like Star Trek, Star Wars, Firefly, 2001: A Space Odyssey, or any other sci-fi in general? The VeggieTales has an episode tailor-made for you. Like Lord of the Beans, this one stems a lot of its entertainment value from whether you know the source material or not. But unlike Lord of the Beans in this case, even if you don't know the source material, it's VeggieTales in space and it's just as silly as it sounds. And it even has an interesting plot twist that I did not see coming. Well done, VeggieTales. Well done. Number 18, Duke and the Great Pie War. Have you ever wanted to see Mr. Lunt and Larry fight each other while riding wooden horses and wielding pie swords? Yeah, I thought so. Mix that with the blues by Larry and you know you have a really good episode that is only held back once again by its side story. Babysitter in Denial is about Moses' sister taking care of him when he is a baby. Riveting stuff. It isn't too bad and it is short, so it doesn't detract too much from the main attraction here, which is Larry and Mr. Lunt duking it out. Pun intended. Number 17, Minnesota Cuke and the Search for Noah's Umbrella. Like Lord of the Beans, this episode is helped when you have seen Indiana Jones, but unlike Lord of the Beans, it is not dependent on a lot of references and benefits greatly because of this. We get to see Larry being an adventurer who is looking for the mysterious umbrella of Noah. While the story is almost a copycat of the superior Minnesota Cuke episode that we're going to mention later, it is still good and entertaining throughout. The only real grievance here is that the characters do far too many jokes where afterwards they wonder if you get the joke, so they look into the camera to let you know that it's supposed to be funny and it's supposed to be a joke so that you laugh. You know, it's almost like trying to get you to laugh without a laugh track. It's very awkward. But that isn't actually too big of a deal and it shouldn't detract anyone from watching this great episode. Number 16, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Now, not to sound too much like a broken record, but knowing The Wizard of Oz helps this episode a lot. Thankfully, pretty much everyone has seen it, as it actually uses this basic premise and retells the story of the prodigal son. Good idea, I like that. While I am not sure I was ever fully convinced that his son leaving his home to go to an amusement park even remotely compares to the real prodigal son, it still works here for a kid's show. Add on a great soundtrack of songs and an instant classic silly song and you have yourself a must-watch episode. Number 15, Tomato Sawyer and Huckleberry Larry's Big River Rescue. This is an episode that takes being good at everything and amazing at nothing to all new heights. VeggieTales is not giving us any instant classic lines or jokes here, but everything still somehow works really well. This is a case of the premise and execution working out really well despite no shining moments. The story is great, the humor works when it tries, and the music is good. In fact, the one thing the episode knocks out of the park is the silly song. While I don't 100% agree with Bob's decision making late in the film, everything works out in the end and we get an episode worthy of the spot. Number 14, Where's God When I'm Scared? The beginning of it all. The very first episode of VeggieTales. And unlike the second episode where clearly they were still trying to figure things out, here they knew what they wanted to do. Or maybe they were trying to figure out it just worked. I don't know. Either way, it works though. Larry's voice is weird. I will warn you about that. The silly song is far too short, and you can clearly tell this was animated in the early 90s, pre-Toy Story. Despite all that, it is charming as can be, hilarious, and has music that everyone will remember. Oh, God is bigger than the boogeyman. He's bigger than Godzilla or the monsters on TV. Nothing in this episode falls flat. While the second half of the episode does feel inconsistent at times, it kind of hints you towards the second episode, it is also funny. You can see a lot of what works with VeggieTales here, and aside from Sumo the Opera, this is what I consider the baseline episode when it comes to figuring out whether a VeggieTales episode has the charm and weirdness that a lot of later episodes lack. Number 13, Larry Boy and the Bad Apple. Everything wrong with earlier Larry Boy episodes is fixed here. Larry fights crime? Yes. Larry defeats the villain? Yes. Larry becomes more like Spider-Man and less like Batman? Sure. I'm not sure how that relates, but that is what happens. Is Junior important? Not at all. Does Larry have that awesome theme song? No, he doesn't have that theme song. Why would you even ask that? Because now he has an even better rock theme song. Woo woo! Oh, and it's infinitely better. The only thing holding this episode back from being an instant classic is that it lacks enough humor to get through the entire episode. It really comes down to the story, seeing Larry Boy actually be competent, and well, that awesome theme song that keeps it up this high. But no, the humor just not quite there like I was hoping. This is my only real complaint with the episode, as otherwise it is infinitely better than the other two Larry Boy episodes that preceded it. These next handful episodes, this next tier of episodes, these are what I consider, so close. So close. They're just 1 point shy of being a gem. 1 point shy of being instant classic. They're still really good. They're just not quite perfection. Number 12, St. Nicholas, A Story of Joyful Giving. Would you believe me if I told you the best Christmas episode of VeggieTales does not have Bob or Larry as its lead, but a new character who portrays St. Nicholas? Yeah, that's what happens here, and it works. And what makes this work is it frees up Bob and Larry as Bob narrates the story, and Larry constantly pops in to help the plot progress further along in a direction it wasn't going to go if Larry didn't come along and make it. He forces St. Nicholas to become Santa Claus. It's great stuff. Everything Larry does has a tangible effect here on the story, and it's straight up just a great silly time. This is the Christmas episode from VeggieTales to rewatch every year, and has improved upon rewatching again. The only weak spot here is the silly song. While not a bad song, it's just strange and not, I mean, it's okay. But with that aside, this episode is a must-watch episode. It's so close to being perfect. Number 11, Are You My Neighbor? The Gourds Must Be Crazy is an insanely good second half of this episode. We literally see Jimmy and Jerry save the day as they eat a meteor made of popcorn. Wow, who even comes up with this stuff? The only thing holding back this episode from perfection is the story of Flipper Olu. While some really like this part of the episode, and it is good, and it actually would bolster a lot of episodes that are lower in this ranking, here it actually feels weaker than the rest of the episode. Yeah. And that's only because everything else is just so darn good. The episode is best when watched immediately after Where's God When I'm Scared. You can skip the second episode. Go 1 to 3. It'll be a better transition. Number 10, Dave and the Giant Pickle. An episode with Junior as the center, ranked this high? Blasphemy. Well, almost blasphemy. This take on David and Goliath is still the definitive visual version of this story for me. No movie or show has topped it. It also helps that this episode has the amazing Scylla song about how much Larry loves his lips, and it got everyone buzzing about Larry Boy and what VeggieTales plan on doing with him in his own episode. Little did we know that hype would not be truly realized for another decade. But hey, it still excites me watching it now, and I already know the outcome. Number 9, Madam Blueberry. Ah man, so many songs you can never fully lodge out of your brain, even if you tried. This episode focuses on stuff, meaning buying and owning stuff to make you yourself feel whole. The story and message here is great. As always with these better episodes, we have great music, silly humor. It's pretty much expected at this point. Have you ever wanted to see VeggieTales rap? Yeah, that happens here. We also see Larry get fired from silly songs, which gives us the classic cheeseburger song and the subsequent special about how Larry is devastated. This episode innovated VeggieTales while sticking true to what works. Number 8, The League of Incredible Vegetables. The best Larry Boy episode is the one where Junior saves the day. Yes, I know this contradicts what I said earlier and also sounds terrible. But it isn't. The League of Incredible Vegetables is the VeggieTales version of the Avengers, and it was actually timely. They released it the same year. Larry Boy is not an incompetent buffoon. In fact, the only reason Junior has to save the day is because Larry Boy gets captured saving Junior. He literally sacrifices himself for Junior. In fact, Archibald might actually be viewed here as the real hero. Complete with fun humor, some new superheroes, and a rockin' theme song as sung by the new Newsboys. All in all, this episode is everything you want from a VeggieTales version of a superhero film. However, this episode suffers from a weak villain and average storyline, just like most Marvel films. Alright guys, it is time. It is the final tier of episodes. These 7 episodes are the best of the best, and it came down to personal preference to pick which ones were the best. Like, ranking these was really hard to do. So, if one of these 7 is your favorite, I totally get it. These are great episodes, but Let's get into it. Number 7, Minnesota Cuke and the Search for Samson's Hairbrush. Take everything I said about Noah's Umbrella and replace it with Samson's Hairbrush. This episode did it first, and it did it better. This episode is the ultimate VeggieTales parody of a Hollywood property, as Larry truly portrays his defining role, Minnesota Cuke. For some, it's Larry Boy, but for me, it's Minnesota Cuke. Understanding the references to Indiana Jones is nice, but it's not needed here. Minnesota Cuke is a standalone episode that is a fun, adventure-filled episode with laughs and the best silly song of all time, Pizza Angel. This is an episode I will come back to again and again. Number 6, The Ballad of Little Joe. Why tell the story of Joseph as a Western? Why not? Larry hijacks the show and takes what would have probably been a pretty good episode by itself and kicks its cowboy boots into the episode's rump and takes us on a joyride. Perfectly paced, immensely funny, and a silly song to remember. Mo and the Big Exit was good, but Little Joe was better. Number 5, Rack, Shack, and Benny. Rack, Shack, and Benny is what I recall being the episode that made everyone recognize VeggieTales as a tour de force in the Christian sphere. As usual, it's hilarious, but it has some of the catchiest music in this entire series and a strong message. All of this is made better when you find out that they originally had a song in this episode that made kids sing about not wanting to go to church or school, but instead eat chocolate bunnies. Yeah, the song was too catchy not to sing, and why not? I would give all I had for the bunny. Number 4, Lyle the Kindly Viking. Junior cracked the top 5 twice. Well, really, he was a main character in Rack, Shack, and Benny. I must be sick. There must be something wrong with me. There is no way he cracked, but he did, for good reason. Junior is a nut job here, and it's hilarious. And in fact, I've noticed that when he's angsty, he's a nut job. When he's a bit kooky, it's my favorite version of Junior. Whether he crosses his eyes while singing or is giving away things he makes to others, he is a lovable goofball here. Add on the fact that Larry is perfect as a side character, which in my opinion is when he works best, and you have an episode that wants to be a musical but knows that musicals don't have to sing all the time. Plus, almost every joke here lands. The plot kind of wraps up unrealistically fast. That's probably my only slight minor flaw with an otherwise perfect episode. Number 3, Josh and the Big Wall. Does this episode have songs that will stick in your head for days? Yes. Is it hilarious? Absolutely. Is it too long? No way. It lasts the perfect amount of time. Does Larry make fun of Bob because he can't dance? Weird question, but yes. The answer is yes, he does. Josh and the Big Wall is VeggieTales at its peak in the 90s. All of the weird humor is present. French peas throw slushies at Josh as they circle the walls of Jericho. It's all so beautiful. So beautiful, and I want to rewatch the episode right now just talking about it. Number 2, King George and the Ducky. Larry is the king, and he wants Junior to be killed. Haha, finally we're getting what I want. So that Larry can have Junior's rubber ducky, which I don't care about, Larry. You can just have that. This is the premise of the story, and it's truly a masterpiece how VeggieTales told the story of David and Bathsheba into a G-rated, hilarious joy. No part of this episode is a waste, and of course, you get to see Larry fall in love with the manatee. Because why not? This is truly the best VeggieTales episode in its traditional sense. However, we still have one more VeggieTales story to talk about. But before we do that, let's rank all the 2D animated Larry Boy episodes from worst to best. This is going to be quick. If you want more details, just watch my reviews. Number 4, Lego My Ego. Number 3, Larry Boy and the Angry Eyebrows. Number 2, The Yodel Napper. And number 1, The Good, the Bad, and the Eggly. All right, it's time. It's truly time. This is the best VeggieTales episode, and you should watch it if you haven't already. Number 1, Jonah, a VeggieTales movie. I know. How did the movie top all of the well-known episodes? How did the movie that was the straw that broke Big Idea's back become the best of the best? Well, have you seen Jonah? Its only issue is that it's too short. Every single song is catchy, every character is entertaining, the actual story of Jonah is great, but they also add on the pirates who don't do anything as side characters to make it even better. It's hilarious, the animation is top notch, and it single-handedly shows why VeggieTales is just awesome. Everything here is just executed to perfection, and I really wish that this had been a roaring success so we could have gotten more high-quality films like this one from them. So if anyone asks you, VeggieTales, why do you still watch that? Isn't that just some dumb kid show? Show them these top 3 episodes: Josh and the Big Wall, King George and the Ducky, and Jonah, a VeggieTales movie. If they don't like those, then they're probably heathen with no chance of being saved. Anyways, what are your top 5 episodes and bottom 5 episodes? Let me know, as actually telling me why is infinitely more interesting than just posting a list. I will read your descriptions for why, so it's not going in deaf ears. For the final time, remember that God made you special, and he loves you very much. Bye.